We're on. Okay. Hi, welcome. This is Dr. John Mason with Masters of the Journey. We're going to do a very special interview with a new friend of mine from Canada, Stephen Garrett. And his passion is in helping people to become so much more conscious about what the dying process is and to dealing with their grief so that they can live more fully and completely. Stephen has done a variety of things. He's been in the financial sector. He's done everything from washing dishes to all kinds of running of nonprofit organizations. He has a couple of books. I hope he'll tell us about them. And I was just on a radio show that he produces and directs out of Vancouver, British Columbia. I had a lot of fun doing it. I think that he and I are very compatible. But the quote that I love best is that Stephen has a passion in life for helping people wake up and live before they die. So welcome, Stephen. How are you today?
I'm great, John. Thanks for having me on, and I look forward to chatting with you and seeing what kind of things we can create for your listeners.
I'm so glad that you're joining us, but you know, a lot of people might not know anything about your background. If you could give us a little bit about your background and lead into why you're doing what you're doing now, because we want to talk about that today.
Great. Well, very briefly, John, I spent the first 23 years of my adult life as a investment finance fellow. I was a banker, a stockbroker type guy, a commodities type guy, and I had a sister of mine, Jody, pass away back in May of 1988, very suddenly and very unexpectedly. And that death really shook me up, and in a way, the shake-up woke me up. And I found myself leaving a 23-year career to leave the big city of Toronto, which is just north of New York, and headed for the coast and became a social worker. And spent 10 years as a social worker running nonprofits, helping people that were homeless, unemployed people, that kind of stuff. Moved into becoming a workshop facilitator, life coach, trainer, educator. And that just morphed into the very natural next step, which was helping people die better. And to die with more humanity, more dignity, more grace, and more spirit. Not to be just a dead body, but to also embrace the spirit who's dying. So that's where I'm at. And I came from Montreal, Quebec in 1949, and I'm now living on the, as you aptly say, the left coast or the west coast of North America, and very much enjoying my new challenge. I find the job I've got, which is deaf educator, to be the most inspiring job I've ever had.
Wonderful, wonderful. I know that here in Bellingham Bay we have a moratorium on dying, so nobody does that here. So it's not really a concern, but I've been other places where people were allowed to die. I'm sorry, I'm making jokes. It has always been a very important topic for me, and we shared yesterday a story that happened for me when I was still a teenager that opened me up to that. So what right now is your vision and your mission?
Well, John, it's a very simple mission statement. I'm about changing the way North Americans relate with death. You see, death isn't the issue. Death just happens. How we relate to death is the issue. And in our culture, as you likely have noticed, John, most North Americans have a very negative, fear-based relationship with death, full of denial and let's just get it out of here. It's not working for us as a culture. What I'm working on is changing the relationship from denial and fear to a relationship of embrace and hopefully inspiration. Because I've found over the years of working with death and dying that death is a profound, wise teacher if only we can open up to death and be with it in a more whole and complete way.
You know, one of our groups in Bellingham for Masters of the Journey that has really a lot of support and a lot of passionate people is a group that we've titled Enhancing Life by Understanding Death. And I'm wondering what your views are if they can change the way they feel about death and dying. Does that change their lives?
Well, what I've seen, John, is absolutely yes. And I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in the lives of people I work with who have confronted death and breathed through their fear, stepped through their fear, stepped through their denial into acceptance. And it's been quite profound. For example, I'll just give you a short little story about an 85-year-old woman who was dying. I was on duty in the hospice here in Vancouver, and the hospice was full of dying people and families, and there's only 2 nurses on staff, and it was just one of those crazy days, and they asked if I could go and sit with Mrs. Smith. So I did. I went to Mrs. Smith's room, and I noticed that she was breathing at a very rapid rate. She looked very anxious and kind of scared, which to me meant that death was approaching. So I simply sat on the bedside with her and lifted her frail little body up and put it on my chest, her back on my chest, and just held her and used my own breathing rate to calm her breathing down. And as she calmed down and kind of came back into her body and her body settled, I just lay her back on her pillows and we held hands for a while till she woke up. And she said to me, she said, "Stephen, can I share something with you?" And I said, "Yeah, go right ahead." And she said, "You know, I always loved my husband, John, deeply, but I held 5% back just in case. And I don't think I should have done that." And then she fell asleep and died 2 hours later. So for her, that was a beautiful deathbed confession or deathbed regret. For me, however, I'm still very much alive. So I took her deathbed regret and morphed it into a life lesson. And I thought to myself, if I don't want to be like Mrs. Smith, confessing to my friend John I've held 5% of my love back to people who are close to me, who would they be? And I made a list, you know, my mother-in-law, my wife, my own mom, my boys, you know, people that are close that sometimes I have bumps and grinds with. And on this woman's generosity to share with me her deathbed regret, I set out to love those people on my list, 5 of them, 5% more. So that's a way of using death in a very real way to inspire my life to be even more full. My boys are now saying, "Dad, can you just sort of like back off the love stuff a little bit?" You know, my mother-in-law's a little happier, as is my wife. So I took a death experience and I morphed it into a life lesson and lived my life through it.
So what you're saying is that this was a brilliant sharing of wisdom that not only maybe gave her some relief, but has given you a new tool to live by.
100% accurate, John. That's absolutely right.
Yes, and I would share my story. My mother and father were different people. My mother was not afraid of change or death. My father was. And as he got older, he got more religious, but his religion didn't fill his spiritual need or the comfort that he required. When he had a stroke at 85 and passed away within a week, I visited him, and he was also breathing very rapidly. He was very scared. He was not at all good with the change and the ultimate transition that we all must face and go through. And nobody was there to hold his hand. Nobody was there doing hospice. It was in a large hospital in Los Angeles, a very famous one, and they couldn't be bothered, or I don't know, maybe they didn't have anyone on staff at that moment, but I had to do that for him, which I had great ambivalence about, which was to try to comfort him and to tell him it was going to be okay to let go. And his breathing did ease, and the next day was his day to pass. So it was a real painful lesson, because I would love people to do that hospice work who weren't so emotionally attached to the individual, but coming from a loved one, I think it has great value if I could release my fear and anxiety also.
Yeah, and John, that's what happens for us. When we take our body physically into a room where death is present and looming, we're mammals and we're programmed to survive. So the scene in front of us, which is dad or mom or brother or sister dying, is reminding us that we have a finite time to live on the planet. And the body doesn't like it. So the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism kicks in. and typically we freeze or flee. And so it takes a little bit of breath work and sometimes the guidance of a great end-of-life coach to help us stay in the space, to stay in the room, to breathe and open into the dying process instead of to pull back and walk away from it.
And I don't know that anybody can be 100% prepared, but it's better to be thinking about this and hearing about this before that moment in time. And that's why your work is such a blessing, helping to make people aware, families come together and understand this better. And I really appreciate what you're doing. And what else are you doing out in the community to kind of get the word out?
Well, we've been running a Death Cafe here in Maple Ridge for 4 years now. And all a Death Cafe is a group of people getting together consciously to have conversations about the meaning of death to life. It's not a grief support group. It's not designed to provide therapy. It's designed to allow community members just to sit and talk with each other about a very important topic. I do workshops all over the West Coast based on primarily how to prepare for the end of life, how to prepare to sit with somebody who's dying, how to prepare for the end of our own ultimate life, how to write legacy letters, all that kind of stuff. I'm currently doing some work with nurses and care aides in hospitals and long-term care homes so that they can learn to take care of themselves a little better when death does come knocking, because they suffer from what I call environmental grief. So I do that kind of stuff, and I just make myself available. I do coaching with families and individuals just to help them through.
Well, why don't we give you people an opportunity to find out more about you, your organization, and even the weekly radio show that you're putting out? Can you give us that information? And I will try to put the links on the end of this when we edit this. But if you could give that to us now, that would be helpful. Certainly.
Our radio show is called Death Matters Live, and it's every Wednesday at 12 o'clock. You can go to www.coop.radio.org and look up Death Matters Live and plug in, and you'll stream it live online on Wednesdays at noon. If you want to find out more about me, you could go to www.aliveindeath.com. And there you'll find a video I've done about my philosophy on dying and death. You'll find a training program and some other information. Lastly, I've got an e-magazine, which is called We Can Die Better. So if you went to wecandiebetter.com, you'll see a regular flow of articles written by myself and by others on the topic of dying, death, after-death care, funeral care, grief and loss, all that stuff.
Okay, so once again, your radio show is on Wednesday. That's noon Pacific Coast time, because some of our viewers are coming in from all over the world. And they can find it by going to that link that you suggested, which is, what is that once again?
It's called coopradio.org, www.coop.radio.org.
And I saw a brilliant and well-produced video that was about a 10-minute interview with you. Is that available through your website, or do we have to go to YouTube and look for Stephen Garrett?
No, if you went to aliveindeath.com, you'll find it about halfway down the page.
Okay, and I really loved it. I loved the way you handled it, what you said. I thought it was, everybody that I've shown it to has been very impressed. And your compassion and your caring come through. It's very sincere, and it's. I know that what you're doing is heartfelt, but for me, it's a blessing. Thank you.
No, you're welcome, John.
Can you give any other examples? I'm going to put you on the spot because our listeners really like those messages that have come from real experiences that can help them, give them guidance, and help them to think about not only their lives, but the people around them and how they either might witness what they're going through or participate in helping them. So do you have any other examples you might be willing to share?
Oh, sure, John. My dear brother, Peter Eric, passed away a year and a half ago. And he had a long-standing walk with cancer, about 6.5 years total. Lots of chemo, lots of radiation, but at the end, cancer got the better of him and he died. We had about 7 good days at the end of his life where we could sit and chat, where there wasn't any chemo or any nauseousness or any of that medical stuff going on. It was just him lying in a bed dying, which was actually quite a relief. And I said to Peter, can you help me understand why you did so much chemotherapy? And why, 6 months ago when your life was looking like it was over, you were still fighting and using chemo and radiation? And he said to me, and I kind of thought this was what he was going to say, but when he said the words out of his mouth, it had a different impact on me. He said, the first 61 years of my life, I didn't live as fully as I could. I was a nice guy. I always held back. I didn't really say what I needed to say, and I just want 5 more years so I can live my ass off. That's a pretty large deathbed confession. And we both had a good cry because there's nothing we could do. He was dying and would be dead in 4 or 5 days. What I could do, though, is check daily to see if each day I'd lived more fully than the previous day. Because again, like Mrs. Smith, I don't want to go to my deathbed with my boys in front of me saying to my boys, guys, I just wanted 5 more years because I didn't live as fully as I could when I was alive. So my brother's death left the gift right beside it of having me check each and every day before I put my little head down on my pillow on a scale of 1 to 10, how full was I today in my living? So things like that are very meaningful, John. And that was my brother, my flesh and blood, my DNA. So the lesson was even more deep because I felt it viscerally in my body.
And the message that you took away is that you really have to live authentically and completely and not put it off.
Yep. And to do that every day as if there were no tomorrow.
Yes, absolutely.
And to do that every day, John, without apology. Just to be fully, authentically me, living my life as passionately as I can without apologizing to anybody for doing so.
And, this is a lesson that I've heard over and over again. And is there if people feel like the video is not strong enough, where can people go find the words, either a book or again, articles that would be something that they could hold in their hand and digest and maybe be able to pass to another person? Because there are so many books about death and dying and near-death experiences and the philosophy of it all. Do you have any favorites that you'd be willing to share?
I've got 2. One is this little puppy here, When Death Speaks, which is written by me. And it's a great little book. It's all about reframing death and accepting death as perhaps a teacher. I've got another book a friend of mine wrote. It's called Bear, The Misplaced Art of Dancing and Grieving. And it's all about using dance to help alleviate the sorrow or the grief that's in the body. So those 2 books are real good books. A third and a final book I would mention is Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal. And that's a profoundly good book. But John, more importantly than reading books, to get your body into places where death is occurring, long-term care homes or hospices, and to actually physically be with people who are dying, for me, is the greatest teacher. Because the book is more intellectual. If we want to make change in our lives, it's got to be visceral in the body. So getting your body around death and dying is, although quite a daunting task for many people, for me, the best way to kind of press that lesson deeply into the body so that we don't forget it.
It's been my experience that people are scared to be there. They have their own fear and anxiety, but I think even more so, they say, what would I be doing there? How could I take the hand of the person who's passing? What could I offer? And you sound to me like you have some lessons about if you were witnessing somebody else's transition, how might you handle that? How could you help our listeners to do that?
Well, the one thing I know for sure is just showing up with presence and authenticity is enough. Just being there. What we do is secondary to being there with them with an open heart. I sometimes walk into rooms, I don't know what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do. I just show up and be with them. And in a way, let the one dying or the family who's grieving lead the way a little bit. Being present with an open heart is, for me, the very best thing anybody can do around somebody who's dying or a family who's grieving.
You know, that opens so many doors for me, and I really appreciate you saying that. I mean, just the metaphysical side, the spiritual side is we're not alone, but sometimes we have to be present physically to show that you're not alone and that people are there and not afraid, and they're not going to run away, and they're not going to make you wrong if and when your transition comes. It's not like you've lost and you're weak. It's like we're going to support you. And what can you say about that?
Well, it's all about supporting the one who's dying. It's their show. It's, you know, we often make it about the survivors or about the medical system, but it really is about the one who's dying.
Yes.
How do they want to go out? What do they need? Do they want music playing? Do they want it quiet? Do they want to be at home? Do they want to be in a hospice? Do they want their loved ones around? Do they want to die alone? There's so many questions that are all focused on the one who's dying. They're the boss, and it's for them that we're there. It's not for us. I had a family in New York, you know, they said, well, we just don't want Dad to die alone. And my first comment to them was, have you checked with Dad? Because you got to check with Dad. What happens if he wants to die alone? He'll wait you out. You'll have his whole day scheduled and full of visits and people. And the one moment where there's nobody in the room, he'll die. So they went and checked with Dad. And Dad said, no, I don't want to die in front of my boys. I don't want to die in front of my friends or my wife. I'd rather die alone. So they took that and they scheduled times during the day where Dad could be alone.
Gosh, you know, that's such an important hint. And I've been through that 3 times now. You know, when my father when we left the room, half hour later, we got the call. When my mother was in the hospital, she was ready. Half hour after we left, we got the call.
Yeah.
When my wife was in our home, we spent all night in vigil. And when my older son, my sister-in-law, and I got up to take a break, we walked out of the room and my brother-in-law sat in. He came back 5 minutes later and said, you know, she passed. She was just waiting for you guys to be somewhere else. And, you know, for us, in some ways, it was all about us. And we wanted to be there and we wanted to share that moment, but that wasn't who she was and what she wanted or needed.
Yep.
And I've seen that 3 times. So that's a very important message. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, you know, for me, John, if I left a piece of advice for your listeners and your viewers, it would be just show up. I've got a little bracelet I wear that a friend of mine back east has set up. I'll just put it up here. It says, #I just showed up. And it's a little program she's running to let people know, because everybody wonders, like, what am I going to do and what am I going to say and how am I going to be? And she and I both say, don't worry about the small stuff.
Yeah.
Just show up.
That's such a blessing. And gosh, such an important lesson to help us overcome our fear of inadequacy in such an important time. Thank you. Thank you. We're just going to start to wind this part of our interview up, and I say this part because I hope that you'll come back and we'll be able to do more together on different topics and work together. Is there any other message that you'd like to leave with our viewers that would be something that may not have been covered by the interview, or just something that you want to emphasize?
Well, when it comes to death and dying, because this is what I'm up to in my life, this is my purpose and my passion, I notice that our human lives are absolutely, capital D, dependent on death. And yet when death comes knocking on the door, we're really bad hosts. We turn away that very thing that's helped us survive our life. Example, I eat chicken, I eat fish, I eat vegetables, I eat fruit, all living things that died so that they could nurture my body and I could live. So I'm just going to encourage your viewers and listeners to perhaps be a bit of a better host when death does come knocking. I'm not saying it makes it easier. I'm not saying it makes it better. I'm not saying it takes the grief away. But it does bring some human grace to a very challenging time.
Well, thank you so much for these words. And would you just please give us the contact information just one more time? And like I said, if we can get the editing done correctly, we'll try to put it on the back end of the video. But if you could share that, that'd be great.
Certainly, if people want to get a hold of me, the best website to go to is www.aliveindeath.com. If you want my email address, I'm happy to provide that as well.
Yeah, but if you can.
Sure. My email address is Stephen, STEPHEN, at embraceyourdeath.com.
Well, thank you very much. And I look forward to us doing things together in the future. We have a number of people in Bellingham who would be really excited to meet you in person and may be able to find a way for us all to network and be supportive of one another. So maybe I could see you down here, and then I know that you were thinking that I should come up to all the way up into Canada, like that's at least a half an hour. So I hope I can do that after we figure out exactly why I'm coming to Canada. It's a whole different country, you know.
It is, totally. I'll be very happy to come down to Bellingham, and it's not a long drive for me. And I've got some friends down in Seattle I could look up as well. So we'll get that arranged when I get back from my trip back east.
Okay. And Stephen Garrett, thank you once again. I'm going to end this part of our video for right now. And it's a blessing to have you and the work that you're doing to help people live more consciously and live without necessarily the fears or anxieties of death. And I so appreciate what you're up to. Thank you.
You're welcome, John. My pleasure.
Okay, great.